So let's talk about the Roxburgh article. Roxburgh is trying to do a few different things. He's trying to talk about human suffering, kind of writ large, right? And that's why he introduces Frankl, philosopher, into the conversation. And I really like that he does that. He's trying to address a very real, recent catastrophe, the tsunami that hit India in 2004, and then also appeal back to an ages-old story, the story of Job from the Old Testament and the suffering that Job endures. So I want to talk about Roxburgh a little bit. Maybe this will help you think through your own thoughts in the article. Like with Green, I probably am going to poke a few holes there in how I approach it. And that is not to invalidate necessarily what Roxburgh et al. Have written, as much as it is to maybe demonstrate how I read an article of this ilk. And maybe that gives you license, maybe it gives you some tips on how to read critically through some of these kinds of articles. Or other kinds of things that you read. So on page 1258, Roxburgh writes this: Job endured innocent suffering. And Roxburgh contends that that's what went on with the tsunami in India in 2004. And when I think about that, and it's true, the biblical record is that Job endures though he was innocent. But it makes me think about some of the hyperbole, I guess, that comes out of these kinds of natural disasters, where very often Christian preachers, and again, maybe those in other religious traditions are saying the same kinds of things. I kind of suspect they are, especially as you think about some of the statements by clerics in Islam that run counter to mainstream Muslim thinking. But you've got preachers that claim, Christian preachers that claim that events like Hurricane Katrina or other hurricanes or earthquakes or other kinds of natural disasters, that this is punishment, God's punishment for people's sins. And I think there's a couple of things wherein that doesn't really play with Job, because the idea in Job is that Job had not committed any kind of sin, that Job was innocent. But it's I guess also frustrating to me, because there are a lot of innocent people, especially when you think about children, right, that die, or their lives are radically transformed for the negative, or what appears to be negative from where we sit, right? When we make those kinds of statements, I guess I kind of shy away from that kind of thinking and that kind of speech, because again, that is above my pay grade. Is there suffering in the world? I think there is suffering in the world. Do the innocent suffer sometimes? Yes. And sometimes, if I have a friend who lost a brother essentially to alcoholism, and this brother of my friend was bound up by something that he couldn't escape. And so there's one side of me that has a kind of compassion. There's another side of me that said, but at what point human responsibility, right? And so I think we all feel that tug. It's the person that, like one of my uncles, who smokes for years and gets cancer. Well, do I wish he didn't have cancer? Yes, but there are some kind of natural consequences. We can connect those dots pretty quickly and pretty easily. It becomes much more difficult when we say, this happened, this city is devastated because of this sin over here of this other group. just not somewhere I want to go. But the Roxburgh article makes me think about that. Makes me think about how my language can be improved to better distance people from that kind of thinking. Okay, so also on page 1258, Roxburgh et al. Write this: Frankel emphasizes will to meaning as the most basic human phenomenon. And so as I think about that in my own kind of theological development, in Genesis 1 and 2, it says that humanity is made in the image of God. And in the image of God, he creates male and female. And so I have thought about this with my students sometimes, and we've talked about what it means to essentially be created in the image of God. And I think that the idea that one can will is a helpful way to think about essentially what it means to be human. In some way, I can determine my future. Frankel emphasizes this in a little bit different way. My focus is on the will to do X, Y, or Z, but Frankel and Roxburgh following Frankel emphasizes the idea that finding meaning in X, Y, or Z, finding meaning in events, willing to find that meaning, to look for the why, that is essentially what it means to be human. That is the most basic human phenomenon. So I'm torn. Are those, again, two sides of the same coin, or are they different things? There's a difference, I think, between instinct and will. Will very often goes contra instinct. But is one willing this thing because they already intrinsically have judged that thing, whether it's an action, a response, or whatever, has meaning for them? So I'm still kind of in process of what I think about that, but I think they are related ideas. And since I had made the point in one of the other lectures, I'm pretty sure, at least I meant to, that my thought about the Imago Dei has to do with willing. I thought I probably should just come back around, since Frankel makes this statement that's certainly very similar to, or Roxburgh makes this statement about Frankel that's certainly very similar to something that I've said. So we'll come back in just a minute and talk a little bit more about Roxburgh et al.